Welcome back. Session 3, part 2. We are still continuing on this. I wanted you to get familiarized with the questions. As I said, the questions are not simple as going for a driving license anymore. The questions are going to be complex. Your employer is actually asking you to explore those questions. Here is another example. Are the teens addicted to the cell phones? It's kind of a coming either because I have been observing, or perhaps I have a gut feeling. I have some guesswork. Are the teens addicted to the cell phone? Okay. And the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to go into the extreme. I'm going to go into the teen and other age brackets. So you remember, you followed me in my examples in the past, that when I wanted to do different scenarios, I tried to actually bring in basically different brackets in mind. So I'm going to have a sample of about 200 teenagers and basically 200 that are not considered to be teenagers. Let's say anybody, just for the sake of definition, I know I'm wrong, but let's just make an example out of this. So let's say anybody below 25 is considered to be teenager, and anybody above 25 is considered to be a non-teenager. So what is my sample? I'm going to have a sample. I'm going to take a look at the basically in this case, I'm going to have a sample of I could potentially conduct this experiment in very much different ways. First approach, I'm going to have a sample where everybody in that sample is going to be a teenager, and then I'm going to have a sample where everybody in that sample is going to be a non-teenager. Then I'm going to take a look at their cell phone usage, texting, social media, all of that. And then I can see clearly that there is a significant difference between them. Or maybe I don't see a significant difference at all. If I don't see a significant difference at all, this becomes, you actually have rejected it. You have rejected this to say that teens are addicted to cell phone, because not only the teens use cell phone, but also anybody above 25 years old is also using cell phone in the same way as people who are using the cell phone below 25. So you have rejected that statement that teens are addicted to cell phone. It's just simply rejected. You could potentially have a different experiment set up. You could potentially say, okay, let's have a sample here. And in that sample, I'm going to have half teenager, half non-teenager, and then half teenager, half non-teenager in the other sample. And I'm going to take a look at their cell phone usages. And keep in mind, at this time, I'm not necessarily pinpointing to that specific bracket of the teenagers less than 25 and more than 25. I simply look at the cell phone usage of the entire sample and I'm going to consider all of those 200 below 25 and 200 above 25 as anonymized. I don't know who is less than 25 and who is more than 25 years old. I simply have a sample here, 200 less than 25, 200 above 25, and then another sample there, and I'm going to examine their social usage, social network usage, cell phone usage. You could potentially touch the screen of the cell phone, and I could potentially grab that using the Wi-Fi router that exists in the domain. And two separate samples, and I see there is not much of a difference between them. And that's going to be a basis for a different hypotheses. And the hypothesis is the average cell phone usage, irrespective of the age, is going to be this amount of, for example, it's going to be 10 gigabytes per day, something like that. I'm just making a case, right? So you need to be very much aware of what the setup is. And in this case, what is the input variable? What is the independent variable? It's the age. What's the output variable? Is the social network usage or touching of the cell phone. As you touch, I'm going to record that, right? So the input is going to be age and the output. Now, is the weight of the participant an important factor? Maybe you say no. Maybe you can actually examine that. Is the race going to be an important factor? Maybe you can say yes. Maybe saying that the people of different races may not have equal access to the cell phone anyway. So you could potentially bring that in the follow-up experiment and then basically have that examined. You need to actually establish your hypotheses. For example, if I bring the race, my hypothesis is going to change in the follow-up experiment. I'm going to say the race has an impact in the social network usage of the individual. I didn't even say age bracket. I simply say individual. I could be 50 years old and belong to race A, and I could be 20 years old, belong to race B. It's as simple as that. So you need to formulate your hypotheses and then see whether there is going to be a significance. If you happen to have two samples, separate samples, would they make sense or not? Chewing gum and the danger associated with the basically the health of your teeth, the dental health that you have. Why don't you go ahead and basically say so? You can say the more the person chews the gum, the more the dental health deteriorates. So you are going to have a relationship between a variable called chewing gum and a variable called dental health, and each one of them has to be measured. So you need to be, you basically have to have a metric to measure that. This is a very famous case. It actually eventually ended up costing $200 billion for tobacco industry. That was, I think, 1967 or something. I don't remember that. But it was a long time ago. But at that time, the government, US government, actually took the tobacco industry to the court and actually proved that a smoke at that time, a smoke is actually causing lung cancer. But it's not the fact that it was proven or disproven. The court actually said that the companies knew that there is a relationship and they deliberately hid the information from the general public. That was, I believe, if my memory helps, that was the reason that the tobacco industry got punished heavily. Now, you have a gentleman who is, or a lady who is actually smoking, and the idea is that you are inhaling the air that is already polluted with the smoke, and it comes into your lung, and the lung eventually going to have to go toward the cancer. Whatever mechanism that happens inside the lung is beyond our expertise. And if you need to actually go into that, you definitely need to learn that. That's part of your job as an expert, domain, as an expert knowledge. You must attain that knowledge as how the polluted air is actually causing the lung cancer. Now, it's kind of common sense to us, but if you take a look at this statement, the statement is simple. Smoking causes lung cancer. Now, you go and you have, as we discussed in the past, you grab two samples, and when you grab two samples, you are going to see whether there is going to be significant difference between the two samples that you have. So you could potentially have a sample of people who are smoking. So 2,000 people of smoking and 2,000 people of smoking, and you take a look at the output, and the output is diagnosis of a lung cancer, and you see the 2,000 people who got smoking in sample A, 1,900 of them actually got cancer, and the 2,000 people smoke in sample B, 1,928 people got cancer. The difference is really minimal. Life is life, it's very important, but from a scientific numerical point of view, the difference is really minimal. We call this null hypotheses. But as a data scientist, your task is very complex here. And as I said, this is beyond the scope of this class. Actually, follow-up studies have come to understand that the gene of the person has a huge impact on the plaques that are going to build inside the lung. So the question is it the smoking that is causing cancer, or is it the gene that is causing cancer? And that's another question, and that's another hypothesis, and that requires another null hypothesis, and then it requires another alternative hypothesis. This is something that is closer to home, and that relates to you. Would the amount of sleep that you have has a relationship with the grade that you have? So if you don't sleep properly, your brain obviously is not going to function properly. So I'm going to say, this is the question. This is the statement. 8 years of sleep is going to improve the grade. 8 years of sleep is going to prove the grade. Now, I'm going to have different experiments set up. One setup is simple. I'm going to grab 2,000 students who have slept 8 hours and 2,000 students who have slept 8 hours, and I'm going to take a look at their basically grade and see whether they have improved or not. In the past, they didn't. Now, through the experiment, with my request and a few candies and cookies, they actually agreed to sleep 8 hours, and then we are going to compare the results. We take a look at that, and we take a look at this, and we see there is no difference between these two, and that would be something that to talk about. Another way of looking at it is this. I'm going to have people who have not slept 8 hours, maybe 6 hours, maybe 10 hours. They slept 6 hours, they slept 10 hours. So the median or the average is going to be 8 hours, and I'm actually looking into people. So my sample is different. My sample this time, I'm going to have people who have 8 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep, and 10 hours of sleep. Then I'm going to actually check on their grade and see whether this is going to be different. So I'm going to have 2 separate samples, and I'm going to take a look at that. And therefore, I'm going to come back and say whether this is a null hypothesis, or is this going to be an alternative hypothesis, and what is my input and independent variable, and what is my output or dependent variable. This is very clear. Of course, hours of sleep is going to be your independent variables, and your grade is going to be either a static grade or the fact that you have improved. Improved grade means your grade after sleeping 8 hours versus your grade you have not slept 8 hours. Then that's going to be the way you're going to actually you're going to make a judgment on. I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to continue my discussions as I move to the next stage.